Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome to the Lessons Learned podcast. Every week we catch up with educators from across the motu. Today I am joined by writer, educator and warrior for the people of Taranaki, Airana Ngarewa. Kia ora Ngarewa, how are you? I should also say I'm Billy, the host for today, I guess. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Tēnā koe Pele, tira tēnā koutou, te unga e whakarongo mai ana, ko tēnei te whiori o te kiore, e kawea mai e turi mārunga te waka aotea, koira noa, really, no reira uri tēnei o te kaatua o Taranaki mā tunga. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. I'm really excited because we've been trying to tee this up for a little while, and I'm glad to have you here in Auckland because we don't travel well outside of Auckland, I guess, with our with this particular podcast at the moment anyway. To start with, I thought we'd kind of get into a little bit of your journey into teaching. You know, I think lots of the headlines around yourself, talk about, MMA fighter turned teacher. There's this kind of stereotype that I feel like they keep bringing in to that kind of narrative, and maybe I'm wrong, but around like, you've gone from a life of being an MMA fighter to a life of teaching. But I don't know. Is there something you kind of identify with, or have you always kind of seen yourself in the education space?
Definitely not see myself in the education space, at least not within our institutions of education.
Yeah.
I might be the only Māori in the whole history of Aotearoa New Zealand to be kicked out of kohanga reo, and then almost kicked out of primary school, and then almost kicked out of intermediate, and then almost kicked out of high school. So once I left high school, I was, as far as I was concerned at the time, gone for good.
Yeah.
Like many of my brothers growing up, I wanted to be a pro athlete.
Yeah.
MMA was the sport I chose. That didn't mean there wasn't a whole lot of time dedicated towards serving in some other spaces, teaching and mentoring within that sports model, within that space. That was how I chose to serve at the time, and spent countless hours volunteering when I wasn't actively training, lived my life in the gym.
Yeah.
My home was my second home. Gym was really where I lived.
Yeah.
And the transition into teaching was really by accident. Kind of describe it as life conspired against me. That I had a fellow I was working with. He asked me to come and mentor some of his boys who school wasn't working for, boys who come from some really, really tough places. I jumped in, did a couple of hours there. They wanted me to do some more hours, did a couple of hours there. Came back home to look after family. Another school called, asked me to do some work with their boys, come in, did a couple of hours there. And then my auntie Nick, who was the principal of Pātea area at the time, said, well, there's this program. If you want to do more work for the kids, more hours with the kids, and help them in the classroom, the place where you struggled the most, here's the avenue. And that's how I ended up there. It wasn't even my own plan, really.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting, because I think it's also about one of the things that we've found a bit of a pattern with, a bit of a trend, is lots of our teachers also have parents or aunties and things like that. It's so often our whānau who kind of pull us back into those, or our extended whānau, I guess. Like, so kind of whereabouts was that? Was that down in the Taranaki area? Or?
Yeah, down in Pātea. So it's a population of about 1,000 people growing up. The average annual income was around $19,000. So it's a whole community doing it really, really tough. The economic heart of that place closed down in the 1980s, and so 40 years has just been rife with insecure employment. We call our meatworks over the next town over our university. That's where you go after high school. Everyone goes after high school. You might get 6 to 9 months of employment a year, and for many of them, for decades, that was as good as it got.
Yeah, that's real similar with Moirewa, where there's another meatworks up there, and the connection as well, I guess, of where they put the meatworks in, like, areas where there's not a lot of other industry, and that gets referred to as the university. So it's really interesting. And also maybe not take away from the things that the opportunity that people get from those spaces, but it's interesting how those things kind of end up that way. So, yeah, What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, no, I think
I see your face. You're like,
I think you're exactly correct. I think it's a place that, for a lot of our whānau, they do really, really well. They're going to get paid more than they're ever going to get paid anywhere else, at least coming straight out of high school. We had boys leaving school at 16, going on, and this is 10 years ago now, going on like $25 an hour. They're working night shifts, so it's a really hard time, and it's really insecure employment. But like all of our whānau, they're doing everything they can to serve. Yeah. And sometimes you don't have the privilege of thinking 3-5 years in advance. Sometimes you don't have the privilege of earning nothing for 3 years while you focus on yourself and your own education with the hopes that you can come back and help later. Sometimes that help is needed now. You actually don't get to leave your home.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a bit of a luxury. What was it? What do you think it was for you kind of looking back now? Like, you know, getting first Māori to be kicked out of Airana Ngarewa. Or, you know, through your journey, what made it so difficult to you, or what was so kind of opposed to who you were as a young person?
It's a really interesting question. The Airana Ngarewa situation was a little bit different because I was there on my own marae. I was there with my own aunties. It was probably, we probably had a whole number of our whānau there who just weren't too skilled in the pedagogical practices, best practice. Yeah. So they were... The way they would treat their whānau was the way they would treat their kids. Yeah. And we know sometimes that works for kids and sometimes it doesn't work for other kids. Yeah. And for whatever reason, I just wasn't one of the kids that worked for. If I look back, I remember it being predominantly young girls. So I probably brought in a much different energy. And this is maybe a Airana Ngarewa with 8 to 10 kids. Yeah. And I think if I looked back on it and reflecting honestly about my own whānau, I think it was easier for them if I wasn't there. And not necessarily the fact that it couldn't work for me, but it would be better for everyone else if we just, you know, let this one slip through the cracks. Okay. I think primary was a different experience in my first few years at Pātea Primary because there was a real conscious effort from the teachers there to engage me as best as they could. Yeah. Mum would chuck me in the car every morning. I'd absolutely refuse. I had a hell of a time at Airana Ngarewa, already been kicked out, so, you know, school wasn't for me. She would drive me past the car park, past the school gates, to the front door. Mum would open the door. Teacher would grab me, put me inside the classroom. They'd swap a fresh change of clothes. And that would be my life for the first year, every single day, as far as I remember. Yeah. So I had a teacher who was really willing to do everything they could to ensure that school was going to be the place for me, that school was going to work for me, and it was going to work for my whānau as well. Yeah. So I was very, very lucky. And then from that time onwards, bar maybe 3 teachers across 13 years in school, it was just real rough going. I think teachers who made very, very effort to connect with me. Yeah. And I was probably a young know-it-all, did really well academically. I was a really good learner, which meant school was really boring for me. There wasn't necessarily and I come from little country schools. These weren't big schools with a lot of resources and that kind of thing. Yeah. So if you weren't within the mainstream, stuff got really tough for you very, very quickly. You're kind of left on the side. We had a hallway in Pātea Primary that was literally nicknamed Airana's hallway because that was my classroom for most of the year. I would have thought that if I had a teacher sit down and talk with me probably just once and have a conversation with me, not a growling at me, then probably that would have changed things. Because when I think of those 3 teachers, 4 teachers if I count primary school as well, that's all they did. Yeah. All they did was have a conversation with me, maybe a couple of times a week, not even a significant amount of time, rather than expect that the moment I walked into the door that they were going to be the grown-ups and I was going to do what I was told immediately.
Nice. Yeah. And there's that, like, I guess is there something you engage in your own practice and things like that?
Yeah, certainly. A conversation goes a real long way. Yeah. Even if you've come into, because I've been an acting deputy principal for most of this year, so I've primarily been dealing in the pastoral space. So for our boys and our girls whose school they're not having a good time at all, classroom isn't working for them, playground isn't working for them, they're finding themselves in a whole lot of trouble. And these are kids who have written off school completely, but they've not written off the individuals within the school. So the kids I have the hardest conversations with are the kids I end up having the best relationship with.
Yeah.
There's a real consistency in how we're going to engage with each other. We're going to engage with each other as human first, rather than within the power dynamics of the school.
Yeah.
There's a certain place we're going to get to, and we make that very clear throughout that process. But if there's a kids come to school and mufti for whatever reason, and that you growl them before you've had a conversation with them, oh, what's up, bro? You all good? What's going on? Most of the time, they're going to tell you that, oh, stuff's in the wash. Oh, sweet. We'll go sort you the uniform for the day, bro. Follow me.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to, at least within my own experience, they're not going to come and find you. You have to go and find them and have that conversation at a real level.
Yeah.
And you're not even going to win every battle on every single day. Sometimes there's certain allowances you have to make some of our whānau because they're going through some really, really tough stuff. So what do I have to do creatively to ensure that I'm meeting this young kid's needs? I was talking to the secondary school kids yesterday, and we were talking about how can we write a novel as like a teenager, what that might look like. And I was just teasing them, and I said, oh, just skip fourth period. Go write it then. And they had a big laugh, big applause. And I went back home and I thought about it. And I thought if a kid came up to me, they had a very clear idea of what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, it would be my responsibility to find that time for it.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we don't go to art 3 times a week. Maybe instead you come sit in the back of my classroom. I'll find as much time as I can for you while I'm teaching the other kids. I speak to your whānau. If we're all on board with it, we'll find the time to make school work for you, your passions, your dreams, your aspirations, and it's going to line up much better. They're going to be far more driven to learn and far more driven to become the kinds of person, the kind of persons they can become if they're given that level of respect. And we're lucky to be working in a high school environment. I'm lucky to be working in a high school environment because the children have that level of vision at that stage. Many of them know what they want, or at the very, very least, know exactly what they don't want. Yeah. Which is helpful too.
I think there's something that's really missing in our schools at the moment. And I think some schools are trying to do it in terms of trying to find spaces for young people to find their own interests and pursue those within the school environments. Of course, I think that's also where the resource comes into play as well sometimes. And it's interesting how that plays out. I'm interested in terms of the disciplines. Maybe it's around the respect things, around like your interest in MMA. How does that play out in like your interactions with the young people too? Like, are you handing out pads when the when the conversations don't work? Or because like sometimes I think, do our kids just need to burn off some energy? Is it need to get out and hit the bag a few times and then get back in the classroom? Or
well, we had 3 young ones who were national champion boxers. And they just couldn't help. We all have mates like this. So you're having a conversation with them. They're just shadow boxing from 9 to 3 every single day. Shadow boxing. And then they'd get carried away every now and again, and they would start punching each other. Yeah. I was like, so it wasn't a good look. And we had a few conversations, and then it happened 2 or 3 times where they'd end up punching the wrong kid. And one of the times it happened to be a neurodiverse kid who just couldn't read what was going on. Yeah. And the whole thing sort of escalated. And so we got all their whānau in multiple times. We're trying to work our way through it. These kids they probably have some level of neurodiversity themselves, or just no ability to mitigate that behavior. Yeah. Like impossible for them to mitigate that behavior. Their parents knew it. We knew it. And we even got their coaches in to have a conversation. Coaches knew it as well. Yeah. This is what these boys were going to do. Yeah. And if we can't adjust our expectations of them to find some vehicle by which they can get that out of their system, then they were going to get driven out. However that would look like, a couple of detentions, and then that continuous behaviour. We know how it goes for some of these kids. And so we just sat down with coach and whānau, and what we ended up deciding is, every time they shadow box, we're just going to send them on a 1K run. They bring their running shoes every day. We had a little block around it, coach all of them to get fit so they were ready. So it worked out. All of our goals were all aligned. Yeah. They'd rather shadow box than go for a run. Yeah. But if they couldn't get whatever that burning drive in them out of them, then that was how we were going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's little stuff like that.
Yeah.
Most whānau, most kids you couldn't send on a 1K run because they were playing up. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
But because we managed to collaborate with the coaches, with the whānau, with the kids themselves, that ended up being quite successful. We had boxing classes and stuff that worked for a little while, but sometimes when our kids turn on that mindset, it's hard for them to turn off. It's hard to go, okay, I'm boxing from 10 to 11, and then I'm not boxing for the rest of the day. So you try things and sometimes they work, and then you try the things and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But definitely the MMA goes a long way, particularly with the boys. Like, they don't care about the writing. It's nothing to them.
Yeah.
They still want to talk to me about the time I was fighting 5 years ago.
Yeah. So it's a good way for you to kind of find that connection and that vibe between you and stuff. Awesome. One of the things we do on the pod is we do a section called all good or not good. So I just give you an option. You tell me if you think it's all good or if it's not good. And if you give me an interesting answer or reaction, we'll dig into it. So, school lunches, like the free lunches that are set up, are they all good or not good?
All good.
All
they
good?
are, I've said for the longest time, the two most necessary interventions in order for schools to succeed, particularly at the high school level, but even more at the intermediate level as time goes on, is we need our kids fed every single day. At our school, they get fed twice.
Yeah.
For our bigger boys, and we're not all bills are built like me at 12 years old, 40 kg, and maybe I could get by cheese and crackers and a sandwich.
Yeah.
But some of our boys come in at 12 looking like they're 25.
Yeah.
And no amount of sandwiches is going to get them where they need to go.
Yeah.
And the other thing is mental health professionals as deans.
Nice.
Or with deans.
Yeah.
If you have one school counsellor in a school, they're not going to be able to meet the needs of, we've got about 1,000 of our school, we've got 1,000 kids, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts. Last week in Pātea, we had 6 young men die, all younger than I am. The oldest might have been 26, youngest in his early teens. One was stabbed to death at a party. 2 had taken their own lives. 2 had stolen from a store, stolen the car as well, and got into a police chase, crashed the car, died in a fiery car crash. Another one, I'm not too sure how he's died yet. These are all Māori boys, all in the wider Pātea area, 1,000, 2,000 people. You can just imagine the psychological harm that whatever that unwellness that these children were going through, that encouraged them, that this was how they processed it and worked their way through it, but also how that waves sweeps through community.
Yeah.
And if you don't have anyone in school, or you only have one person in school to navigate that, and this is 1 week of trauma, let alone everything that meant these kids made these decisions, and what might happen as a consequence, and thinking more widely, thinking societally. Get our kids fed, and then get someone who can have a conversation with them. Someone who's not going to stand them down like I have to. I get to have conversation with these kids, but we know there's lines that they're not going to cross because they're worried about what the consequences might be.
And I think when there's only that one person, and there's no person, there's no counselor.
There's no person.
Then it also kind of falls on our teachers as well, right? Because, and it shouldn't do. And they're not trained to do that work.
And I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
I won't speak for any other teacher, but I've sat there with kids who've just buried their mum yesterday after she's had a brain aneurysm. So just freak accident. She's passed. Kid, their safe place is school because they get mates and they get food. But learning wasn't going to happen that day. Learning might not happen that week. And so I sit there and I can listen. But man, I can't. There's very little I can do beyond that. But try and go, okay, when's the soonest time we can get you in with a counsellor? Or how can I make sure that every teacher you trust is aware of that this is going on? So that when you need someone, there's someone who can look after you.
Massive. Using Using Maori names for government departments. All goods, not goods.
All goods.
Yeah.
I actually think it's really interesting. Mostly because I think it's aspirational that the moment we take these things away, I guess maybe a couple of things. One, I think Te Reo Māori is the natural language of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Yeah.
It should be the name of every town, of every city, of every street,
Yeah.
of every government agency. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I also think that, I'm going to drag this out, Billy.
All good.
Thank
you got this.
I also think that when we have Māori names on these agencies, then it encourages thinking about Māori, the Māori people that they're serving. I think it encourages more Māori to want to be a part of these organisations. But I think most of these names aren't living up to the expectations. Yeah. However, they are aspirational. They speak to the direction we should all be travelling in.
Yeah.
But perhaps that's too much idealism.
Nah, I get it. Because often I think, even as someone of Pasifika heritage, I get much more from a metaphor of like where we're heading in our direction. You know, ako mata tupu tells me a lot more than teach first NZ. You know, I think sometimes the government departments, they're so sterilized in lots of different ways.
What was we were talking about it recently. I believe the Ministry for Disabled Peoples, like that's the name of it. Such an ugly name to my own ears.
Yeah.
The Māori name for that organisation, as far as I understand, because it comes from Kiriopai, he's one of our old people down in Taranaki, is waikaha or whaikaha, literally to have strength, to find strength, which is such a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
He's developed this whole vocabulary around how we think about neurodiversity through the Māori language. Like we have autism or autism spectrum disorder, and then in Māori it's takiwātanga, literally in their own space and time, which is such a beautiful picture of how that might manifest, that neurodiversity inside a person.
Yeah, for sure. Compulsory reading in schools.
Oh, I hated reading.
Yeah.
Goods.
And AI in the classroom.
No, it's an interesting one. I'm going to say all goods because it's a tool, and as long as we can use it well, it can be used well.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. I think I want to talk to you about the Bone Tree, but I also want to just be straight up. I've read the first chapter. I've not read the whole book. And part of that is because I keep giving it away. I took it to Samoa with me and had some of our Māori whānau come over, and I was like, oh, you need to check out this book. And that was my time I set aside for reading it. So I got into the first chapter. What I really enjoyed was like it really had a different voice to anything else that I had read. And it also really explored, I think it had a really beautiful image of Taranaki, or what I imagine to be Taranaki. And as someone, you know, as an ignorant Jaffa Aucklander, who doesn't get out of Auckland much, has never really had the opportunity to travel as much as I would like to have traveled. I think it was really great to explore that and see the different characters there. How have you, like, how much of that is a reflection of your own kind of story in Taranaki and or of the people that you've met along the way, kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people's debut novel is almost an autobiography in disguise.
Yeah.
It's not my experience with this novel, and I was very, very conscious because you kind of have to protect the stories of those around you who are very, very careful about what is said about them.
Yeah.
When it's not said by them.
Yeah.
A lot of our whānau are very, very private, and they have their reasons for being very, very private.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that I'd rather the world not know about them. And we can have a long conversation about whether that does them more help than harm. But that's how they've decided to go about their lives. And so that's certainly why I chose to write fiction, because there's a lot of stuff that I don't get to say and I'm not allowed to say and shouldn't say about the people around me. Maybe once they've dead,
Yeah.
then it's no longer going to affect them. But even then, these stories carry a whole lot of tapu, and when you take a story away from someone, you take away their rangatiratanga maybe. But at the same time, when their stories impact yours so heavily, think about our parents and thinking about our koros and our kui and our aunties, it gets in a really complicated space. So that's probably why I chose fiction, is it allowed me to navigate that far more discreetly. But I think what the Bone Tree does well as my first book, perhaps three things. A lot of learning in there.
Yeah.
The next book will be way better.
Yeah.
Is the hope, is the expectation and the aspiration. One, it honours taranaki.
Yeah.
The first three books, I'm hoping to put out 3 books over 3 years. Next book's out in August, called Pātea Boys. So just nailed it with the title.
Yeah.
The fact that my publishers would work with me on that one. Has like a little boy doing a manu on the front cover.
Nice.
In English and te reo. So it honours taranaki, which is really special. I watch a lot of writers. They look for the biggest, most sexy or most horrible thing to write about because it's automatically attractive. There's a lot of writing about World War II and a lot of writing about concentration camps by people who have no strong association or affiliation with these things.
Yeah.
And to my own thinking, it's probably not an appropriate story to tell with someone who has no wakapapa or no other kind of connection to these spaces.
Yeah.
You've just taken something that's ugly and horrible and you've gone, well, let me write about it so I can sell more books, so people read more of my writing. So taranaki, for that reason, I think it also captures something that's very true of Pātea, but very true of Te Ao Māori more generally, is the strong distrust we have in our institutions of health, of justice, and of education.
Yeah.
That incredible suspicion we carry into these spaces, and historically, for very, very good reason, it clashes a little with my ideas around whether Māori names are good names for these places. But again, I say that out of a place of aspiration, not of reality. But my whānau and my wider whānau, my wider āpori community, the way we look at these spaces is not as if they're going to serve us well, but often, and sometimes this is how I feel about my schooling experience, that it did more harm than good.
Yeah.
That I left there less keen on reading, less keen on writing, less keen on learning, really.
Yeah. Was part of writing this book to kind of address some of those things? Like, was there an aim that you had to kind of have your young people see themselves in the stories that they're reading in the classroom as well? Or
the people I'm trying to help aren't reading.
Yeah.
That is just the reality, and I'm really big on meeting kids where they are.
Yeah.
And if you think that as a late man in his late 20s that you're going to write a book that's 300 pages long, 70,000 words, you're going to stick that in front of a 13 to 15-year-old Māori boy who's never picked up a book in his life longer than 20 pages, and just because it's about taranaki, they're going to read it, or just because it's about you that they're going to read it, or just because it mentions someone with names like them that they're going to read it, it's just not enough. There's too much that has been missed out.
Yeah.
If we can work on the foundations, and this is assuming that that reading is an incredibly essential skill, and sometimes I have my own suspicion around whether there's not, in the modern world, many ways by which we might accumulate and gather this knowledge and express ourselves. I mean, the fact we're on a podcast and we're not interviewing each other over text is indication of that. So not necessarily to reach our young people directly, but what I did recognize as a young person myself, sometimes you don't get to speak in front of audiences till you're 30, 40, 50.
Yeah.
You've had a couple of principal jobs and then they take you around the country. But it was a chance as a bit of a battering ram to kick the door down, to get me in front of audiences, to get me into other schools, to get me in front of theatres full of 2,000 children and preach a little bit and I guess try and empathize with them a little bit and speak to how tough it is to be a teenager, but how important they are, how valued they are. There are two ways our young people are often are dressed in te reo Māori, te reanga ua pōpō, ngā rangatira ua pōpō, the generation of tomorrow, the chiefs of tomorrow, and that's exactly what they are, and that nurturing must happen at a really young age. We talk about mokopuna planning all the time. Sometimes I wonder whether we use that word more than we see it in action.
Yeah.
Succession.
Yeah. Just even from your first chapter, are there moments where it gets a little bit meta in terms of like the messages that you're trying to put out there and the story that you're telling? Like one of the things I feel about the first chapter anyway, and maybe it's spoiler alerts, but this journey to this spring, right? This natural safe space that they feel, and they're having to hide from a farmer who uses the land in a different way, and is almost gatekeeping the spaces that should be ours, or that we whakapapa to anyway. To me, that was like, I was like, there's such a story being told with this story. Is there something that you're always mindful of in your reading too? Or is it something that, like, you wrote this thing and the people are interpreting it a certain way and be like, man, I don't know, I love the story you're telling about, the gatekeeping of our whenua and all of this kind of stuff.
I was asked to present in front of a bunch of English teachers a couple of weeks back, and the head of an English department sat next to me and he threw a few questions my way. And he said, I got exactly what you're saying in the first novel. And I'm exaggerating a little bit because it's funny to me. He goes, exactly what you're saying. I am the gorse.
Yeah.
Yeah, English teachers, we're the gorse. I get it, we're prickling, we're hurting these kids. And I just laughed because that was just gorse. Yes, in Taranaki. I grew up in the Wops,
Yeah.
and Pātea, and then out in the farming territory that surrounds it. Everything that happens there is literally stuff that happens and has happened to me as a young person, and of late, having to jump fences to get down to the river. Yep. The river being contaminated by the local farmers. Yep. Being harassed by the farmers. So I had one, last year, 2 years back. I went for a run. We have a marae te tākere, Manutahi Pā, a short distance from Mum's house. So I was running down the same road as my marae, and a ute started following me.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's really and this is 2 years back, and I'm a very fair, like, I don't look like anyone they feel like they're going to have problems with. Like, if you're looking at me, you're going to assume that I'm not a Māori.
Yeah.
So I couldn't understand what was going on, recognizing that a lot of my whānau who do present differently than I present have a lot more problems than I have. So I have a sprinkling of what these people have pools of, what my whānau have pools of, what my father and my grandfather have pools of, that he just kept following me. And then he pulled up behind me. He goes, why are you stealing from my shed? It's like, bro, like, I'm in shorts, my shirt's not covering anything, I've got running shoes on, I'm huffing and puffing. Like, I don't know what you think I've stolen. Like,
where am I keeping it?
Yeah, that's right. My chest ain't big enough to hide anything in there, bro. And we had this big, long interaction, and he ended up driving off after a little while. But I thought, man, that's really out of it. But there was also, of my father's generation, there was a famous woman who was very protective of her land and had a reputation for shooting her gun when kids, not at the kids, but shooting her gun when kids crossed her boundary line. So I see the metaphor in it, but it's life back there.
Yeah.
Dad likes to tell me all the time, not every farmer's bad.
Yeah.
My dad's who I get my Māori whakapapa from. Not every farmer's bad, not every farmer's bad. And I capture that.
Yeah.
And I get that. But some of them aren't nice.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think, where do you think it kind of, like, I love to hear that there's a trilogy in the mix. Is there any, like, and also hearing, I guess, that we can't just expect our young people to read. Are there other mediums that you'd like it to be kind of explored in?
When I talk to older people are really keen on audiobooks. Audiobooks must have hit Pātea in the last 5 years, because everyone I talk to wants an audiobook. So that's really interesting. I leave that stuff up to the publishers, eh?
Yeah.
But for me, it's just getting in front of our young people. I'm a big believer that the messenger matters as much as the message. if you're in front of our people, if they're convinced that you're someone who's interesting, that you're someone who's important, then they'll start to buy in a little bit. Then you might get a chapter out of them. Then maybe they'll read a single chapter of your book, and that might be enough for them might be enough to convince them that they can write a better book.
Yeah.
And that's all you need. You just need a generation of books to convince the next generation to write better books. After this gig, you say, I was talking to a bunch of kids. There are 3 boys afterwards. So you ended up doing like 45 minutes of signing. And then they ducked back into the theatre for the next round of speakers. These are speakers who'd come from the States and from England. And these 3 boys just didn't. They just hid around the corner. Then they came up to me. They goes, "Oh, Mata, we don't have books, but come and sign my gum." So I signed one's gum, and then I signed another one's gum. And he goes, "Oh, I don't have gum, but I've got a chocolate." So he gives me his chocolate, and I sign his chocolate. And they go, "Oh, can we have photos now, Mata?" I was like, "Yeah, sweet as." So we took photos, and they spent the next hour just, wagging, being silly, which just made me laugh. And then that night I got home and they'd all tagged me on Instagram, all sent me really lovely messages. "Oh, you're the man, Matua. So cool catching up." And they posted on their stories, like our photos together with like the hardest gangster rap. And it just cracked me up that this is how they connected. They were probably never going to read anything I read, but we had a really beautiful connection.
Yeah.
And maybe something will come of that. And even if it doesn't, sometimes a beautiful connection is enough.
Yeah, for sure.
They had a good day at school,
Yeah.
One good day.
How is that, like, with your community at Spotswood? How has, like, the book affected your young people? Like, do they give you a hard time about it, or like, do they have lots of questions?
Our very academic kids all have a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily their experience, but they're also the kids you'd expect to hear about a book and then want to read a book. Most of them got their books from their mums. Their mums enjoyed it. Then they gave it to, in my experience, it's been their daughters.
Yeah.
So the girls who are super keen on it. Maybe that says something about the demographics of our readers of fiction. And I think that's probably true, that it's middle-aged
book clubs
and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's right. And then sometimes it filters down if it's good enough, which is cool. The probably biggest stuff that resonates is when I hit the papers and that kind of thing, which happens fairly regularly with talks, and they always see the picture and they don't read the article, but they think the picture's hilarious, so they'll take little pictures and they'll show their mates, "Oh, look what I seen." And there's one that goes around of me back in my MMA days. So like I'm walking into the ring, I've got this angry ass look on my face, my shirt's off, and they think it's hilarious. Yeah. "Oh, Mats, I didn't know you have abs."
Nice. Cool. One of the things we like to do is kind of like reminisce on some of the things from when we were younger. I think we've done like what was in the lunchbox when you were at school and stuff like that. I wanted to kind of, in this piece, think about books that you kind of came up on. Like I remember myself, my mum got me the Goosebumps Choose Your Own Story kind of things, and the Goosebumps, man, I don't know how that guy wrote so many books. I think it was like definitely like quantity over quality, but somewhere he picked up some pretty cool storylines and through lines and things like that. What were the books for you coming up?
And when I was beginning to read, I read these books called Little Critter.
Oh yeah,
which is just this guy this little hedgehog dog thing that washed dishes with his mum, and it's maybe like 40 to 50 words. And between that and my adulthood, there was almost no books. Didn't read.
Yeah.
Absolutely opposed to reading. When it came to silent reading in class, I would get picture books and flick through the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't my thing.
What about in like high school? Did you have to do, like I remember we had to do To Kill a Mockingbird. Because I think it like showed the age of our school too. Like they just didn't update what the reading materials were at the Crucible. And it was hard work trying to get through those books. Do you remember what the books in your high school?
I think we had the exact same books that just didn't get updated. We had The Crucible. We had Othello by Shakespeare.
Wow. Yeah.
And there was one other book of that same sort of 1920s American literature.
Yeah.
Just no connection at all to us. The language barely made sense. Like, we're jumping into Shakespeare with no pre-learning about, you know, how he chooses to use language and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was just out the gate.
Yeah.
I would have said, and perhaps will still say, that English was the single worst class I had throughout high school. Maybe bar one experience, a couple experiences in history class when we were learning New Zealand history. And that was, over that period of time, that was probably the hardest. A whole bunch of just straight out racism, really.
Yeah. I think one of the other books we read was about some like snow sledding with the wolves up in somewhere, or it's like there was no connections to any of the stuff. I do remember, I think Holes came out around that time when I was at school, and my mum got me that book and I was reading it, and then the English department picked it up, which was cool. But yeah, I mean, it was also, you know, Harry Potter and all that kind of stuff. Found connections with my English teachers, but those weren't necessarily the reading materials, but the things outside that. Cool. That's all good. If there was a message for our young people that you think is really important for them to hear at this moment, sometimes we frame this as like something you would say to a younger Airana. Kind of what would that be?
I'm really big on leaning into playing up.
Yeah.
Just play up. You're going to learn everything you need to learn by playing up, being a little bit silly, crossing the boundaries every now and again. The best lessons I ever learned was the hard way.
Yeah.
Learn everything the hard way.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Thank you so much for making the time for us today, and all the best with the rest of the Writers' Festival and stuff like that, and hopefully catch up again soon.
Tēnā koe o tērā, tēnā tātou. Kia ora.
See you.